Ladies and gentlemen, Track Bro here. I've decided to make a genuine public service announcement today because just recently journalists have been coming out with Tesla Model 3 performance reviews and videos and whatnot, and I've just been bombarded with all this information. So I might as well kind of talk about it because I have very strong views on this topic. So I'm not going to get into background, but I have talked about this before. I've been very vocal about how I feel of Tesla and electric vehicles in general. The scams that they're producing at the moment. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but I will say that they're not just overrated, overpriced, and overvalued by random people that are not really car people. But it seems as though the journalism is starting to actually push on the idea that these are good cars. The narrative is changing on their views, and I'm going to try to demonstrate that not only has the car not changed over like the last generation or whatnot, but also it's gotten worse over time. The value proposition and also kind of like the prospect buyer. What should they buy? Or the prospect buyer, are they going to buy it more? And I think both of these answers is fundamentally what's going to break Tesla. Okay, now I'm getting into philosophies and whatnot. Let's just get to the brass tacks. Today we're really going to be talking about specs and how these specs are mystically wrong. So the first aspect of the Model 3 performance, and really the idea that sticks in people's minds, is that Tesla is fast. People believe that they buy a Tesla Model 3 performance and now they're faster than most sports cars on the market. And I have seen that at first hand. I've seen an iPhone booth seller try to explain to me why he sold his M3, his mommy trust fund M3, and traded it in for a Model 3 performance. And he was explaining me in great detail that it was just way faster than his M3, and that it made way more sense for a guy that was self-financing his freaking iPhone. At the time it was a 13, I think. Let's get into the horsepower metrics, because I think that's really what's important here. The Tesla Model 3 has, any EV vehicle has the advantage of not having a transmission. This is both an advantage and a disadvantage. The Model 3's architecture uses dual motors, its performance has dual motors, and this allows for like an inherent all-wheel drive setup. There's no loss when running no transmission. The only loss between the drivetrain, or the power cell, the DC motors, and the road is twofold. The first one is just the magnetic pull, which includes the forces of the wheel and things like that. And the second one is any kind of adaptive steering that might happen with the DC motor. So this might be steering assist, or it could be just basic traction control. But also there's a whole level of adaptive traction and suspension control that happens with the DC motor. So I'm not going to get into all that, but just know that if you ever lose power, it's not inherently because the Tesla is braking. It's also because the DC motor is working. There's some magnetism happening, and that causes loss on the real world dyno metrics. So calculated by Mountain Pass Performance, the horsepower metrics of the previous generation was between 475 and 440 to 475 wheel horsepower. Now that was depending on the dyno they used. They used multiple dynos, and then also depending on how much charge the battery has. But let's just assume the new Model 3, which seems to have about 20% more not 20%. It's like 20 horsepower, so it's like 3 to 4% more power. Let's say it's 485 wheel horsepower. That sounds pretty good. But when we look at the dyno graph, it tells the whole story. It's not just about peak numbers, it's about how you make that power. So with the Model 3, because it has no transmission, and this is the very first fault here, it peaks really low in the RPMs, so the DC motor's RPMs. And because there's no gearing happening, what happens is that the actual real world RPMs of the DC motor is directly involved in the real horsepower number, which is put on the floor. And when that happens, it means that you're getting a specific horsepower at a specific speed, miles per hour, that the car is going. So it's not like regular cars. When you shift, you can regain that peak horsepower that your regular car has. With a Tesla, it's not like that at all. Actually, you get the peak horsepower at the miles per hour, and then it drops off. Now, two things are important here. The first really important part is at what miles per hour do I peak, right? And the second thing that's really important is how much is the drop off. Because if I'm going 100 miles an hour and I still have 80% of the torque or 90% of the torque, it doesn't sound like a big deal. But that is not the case. And this is exactly why Teslas are horrendous to drive as a sporty application. And that's just one of the very physical limitations that this car has. The actual performance drop-off all the way to 120 miles per hour is over 80%. That means that when you're hitting at the very limits, the top speed of the car, you have less than 200 pound-feet of torque. That is absolutely nothing. And in horsepower, we're talking a peak of just under 500 horsepower, all the way dropping off to 270 kilometers an hour, or 270, horsepower, my bad. So that is a real problem, because when we're driving on the canyon or when we're driving on highways, the most important thing is getting that peak horsepower whenever we want it. And because of how these DC motors work, we're not getting that. We're getting a flat curve, we're getting basically no power and no peaky power either. So you can actually feel that when you're in the Tesla. You put down the paddle and it's like a hybrid. You don't feel any power. Well, it's because it's inherently underpowered. Now, you can fix that with a transmission. I know Porsche tried to fix that with a transmission and kind of worked. It's 2-speed. But it means that for people like us, you're getting minimal acceleration power on the highway, for instance. So it can't be a highway cruiser, for instance. Now, looking at the metrics, it seems as though the car would still be quite fast. Its 0 to 60 times is at 2.9 seconds. That's really fast, right? That's the current journalistic narrative on the topic. However, when you're looking at the quarter mile, it's 12.3 to 12.6 seconds. Now, that tells the whole story. Looking at, for instance, Camaro SS's, even a 2011, 2012 was still pulling, just around the mid 12s. The brand new ones, the 6th gen, they were pulling around, almost exactly 12 seconds. When we look at Subaru STIs, Golf Rs, and cars of that nature, they're pulling sub 12 seconds very easily, high 11s, some cases mid 11s. So, the fact that this car does a quarter mile in 12.3, and also the top speed is like 108 miles per hour, that's nothing, man. That is horrible. And the reason is that past 40 miles per hour, this car loses drastically its horsepower. So how can you claim this is fun? This is a fun car. Pretty much the way I look at it is that if you're doing canyon driving, highway patrolling or cruising or whatnot, if you're doing track driving, or any kind of driving where there's some sort of like long straight happening, well, you're going to end up being very, very slow compared to some other competitors. And so, in my opinion, this is a city fast car, which completely defeats the point of it. Because most cars that are fast in the city have some performance benefits on the highway. They just end up being fast in the city. Nobody wants to actually go fast in the city. You can hit pedestrians. You have speed limits that are very annoying. You got police cars and things like that. Yes, you could argue that you got your autocross teams that will want that city fast driving, but the reality of it is that in autocross you're going to use up the battery so fast, and you really don't want to do that, because sub 50% battery with the Model 3 Performance, you're going to get sub 400 horsepower. You're going to go into really like base Subaru WRX territory of power, and that's not what we're buying the Model 3 Performance for. Like if you're buying it for performance, you're expecting performance, and that's just not what we see here. So what should we actually compare the Model 3 Performance to? Well, for one, if we're looking just at a quarter mile, I mean, this is 2018 Mustang GT with 410 gears fast. You really don't have to do that many modifications to a regular muscle car, and it'll go faster than this Model 3 Performance. So that's out the gate. Let's look at the price. So brand new right now, they're selling them at $70,000 Canadian. That's pretty expensive. We're gonna get into that. Used, I looked at some of the market, and I noticed that a 2019 to 2020 will be between $37,000 and $44,000. Okay, so those are the big numbers. All right. So let's look at the 70,000 to start with. Well, you could get a lot of car for $70,000. For one, you could get a Blackwing. For two, you could get an M3, even a base M3, with a manual, no problem. You could get an Audi, whether it's RS3, RS4 in some cases, S4 for sure. You could get a Volvo if you want something a little bit better on gas, and a lot better if you go for like a diesel, for instance. And on top of that, on top of all those cars, you could get something a lot more pocket rocket for this money. A car that's just as fast and is a lot cheaper to maintain and things like that. So now let's go into the used economy. Now for used, and this is where it completely defeats the point of the Model 3s. You could get a brand new Subaru WRX, the 2024. I know the ugly one, but the one with the 2.4 turbo for 34 grand right now. That's brand new. That's off the lot, and that's with no discounts. A brand new one, like 1,000 kilometers done on it. That's ridiculous. Like, why would you ever consider the Model 3 Performance? These new Subarus, they're known for putting in $3,000 in tuning performance and making more than 400 wheel horsepower. No problem. I mean, that's kind of where the Model 3 falls apart completely. There is no tuning involved with the Model 3. Actually, when they give you updates, they're making it abundantly clear that they're not going to give you more performance. They're going to try to give safety updates. They're giving you legal updates, such as very soon they're gonna be allowed to check the speed limits and limit your car's speed on public roads. That's ridiculous. You should never buy a car like that, especially a car that costs this much. A Volkswagen Golf R, brand new one, or Mark 7. Those are really the ones that people like right now. You can get a 30 grand Mark 7 fully tuned out, no problem. You can get for a brand new Mark 8 for 45 grand. That's used Model 3 money. That's ridiculous. The brand new 2023 GR Corolla starts at 46 grand. I believe I made my point here. There is no reason why you should get a Model 3 Performance. No reason at all. Any car that you can think of, any sports car that has existed in the last decade, will undoubtedly beat this thing in pretty much any category that you actually put it up. The only reason why people are buying this car is because they want a safe pod, a little safe pod that allows them to kind of go on their iPhone while they're going to Canadian Tire or something. These things eat tires, all right? 15,000 kilometers, 20,000 kilometers. Some people, they claim, oh yeah, 25,000 kilometers. Have you tracked it? Have you actually used this thing as intended, as a performance vehicle? No. So how can you claim that you're using it with 25,000 kilometers done on that? That's how much people with M3s do for tires for the Nürburgring. Like how can you claim that's like a good tire usage? All right, tire companies love electric vehicles because of this problem. Secondly, forget about tuning. What about driving around and being able to use your blinkers? What about that? What about just being able to turn on a dime? How do you do that with a Tesla? It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. They don't allow you to do really basic stuff with a car. The whole point of a performance vehicle is that you, in your soul, you can feel the road and go around however you want. The new Model 3s have an update that will brake for you in a turn if it deems that you're going too fast. How am I going to do a Nürburgring? How am I going to go on that's not a performance car. That's not even a car. That's a safe pod. It's a safe pod. So get that out of your head, guys. Model 3 performance is terrible. Go watch my other video I made on sports cars and supercars and whatnot. This thing is slow. It's slow. If you're talking about some of the fastest contenders this thing has, I mean, you don't have to look that far. Get an Audi R8 V8, put a supercharger on it. It's about the same price as a brand new one. This is ridiculous, man. It makes no sense. You get a Dodge Viper, Chevy Corvette, so many nice cars for the same price as this thing. It's a performance vehicle, right? Yeah, forget about it. This is more than Z06 money. This is Z06 plus a supercharger. Ridiculous, man. Anyway, guys, that's my rant today. Have a good day.